Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, free site, dwyervip.com, free site. Today is January the 15th, 2018. Let's talk about steroids. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, this video is really intended for gamblers. I'm not going to accuse any current fighter of using steroids. The purpose of this video is not to out steroid users. Rather, it's to tell gamblers that if you suspect someone is using steroids, then here are a few things to think about in making your bet. But first, let's talk about steroid usage. Let's talk about the level of steroid usage in sports, likely boxing. Now, people might remember the 1988 Olympics, the men's 100-meter final. Simply put, one of the best races I've ever seen in my life. Ben Johnson, that 9.79, I thought it was one of the best races from start to finish I've seen an athlete do. And I'm a track and field fan. I thought Ben Johnson was spectacular. Now understand, I'm a little bit of an agnostic when it comes to steroid use, because quite frankly, I think it's so widespread that I think the outing of the person unfortunate enough to fail the drug test seems to ignore the fact that the field was never level to begin with. So, let's return to 1988. There are 8 men in the race. 8. Right? The winner, Ben Johnson, fails a drug test. We now know that of the other 7, right? Of the other 7, 5 of them, 5, more than half, either used steroids at some time in their lives or were involved in giving steroids to someone else to use. Right? Think about it. So in a race in which, for the first time, 4 of the 8 competitors broke the 10-second barrier, you realize now, just doing the math, that 6 of the 8 guys had involvement with steroids. Right? 75%. Do some Google searches, figure it out. Now, at the time, right, we heard that Ben Johnson failed the test and we thought, oh my God, Ben is cheating the process. Right? The question is, what exactly was the process? Was it some pristine, pure track and field world where Ben Johnson was a villain? Or was it some uneven playing field where only two of the 8 guys in the finals would not later be tied to steroid use or giving other steroids? Right? Let me just say, I believe that boxing is very much like that 1988 Olympics. In other words, you just look at the guys who were busted, and you look at what they were busted for, and you understand that steroid use is rampant in boxing. I know VADA's trying to clean it up. Let's say there's a lot to clean up. I want to focus on Oscar De La Hoya for a moment here. Great fighter, right? Great fighter. But just understand that 2 of Oscar's biggest fights were tainted by admitted steroid use by his opponents. Right? He fights Shane Mosley. Understand that rematch, I thought Oscar won the rematch. I understand Shane Mosley officially wins the decision. Okay, let's just say it's a nip and tuck fight that goes the distance. Well, of course, after the fight, we find out that Shane Mosley was using the cream and the clear. Think Barry Bonds, think Gary Sheffield. We also find out that Shane Mosley was using EPO, right? Something that bicyclists use to increase their stamina, right? It increases the oxygen in your blood, right? Think it through. So for that big fight that Oscar had, it's one of the biggest fights of Oscar's career, right? A rematch of his loss to Shane Mosley. Oscar was fighting a juiced opponent. Well, understand, when Oscar fights Fernando Vargas, did you know that Vargas ends up being busted for winstraw? Now that was a huge fight as well, right? Just forgive the tractor noise here in the background, right? The Fernando Vargas-Oscar De La Hoya fight, which I believe was billed as Bad Blood, was a huge fight at the time. But yet this is the second opponent Oscar fought, think about it, who not only was using steroids, but who was busted for steroids. And understand, steroid use is a lot like drinking while driving, where you're busted, let's say on a Sunday for DUI. Is there anyone watching this video that believes that that's the only day of the week that that person who was busted was drunk while driving? Typically, the people who are busted for DUI have been drinking and driving for a while. The time when they get busted is just the unfortunate time, just the unfortunate moment in a pattern. So let's get back to Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar then fights Ricardo Mayorga, right? Third opponent who gets busted for an illegal substance, furosemide, which people familiar with steroids know is one of the best ways to mask steroid use. Not only that, it's a diuretic in a sport where weight matters. So you have a guy who's too heavy to fight in Oscar's weight class, who then uses an illegal steroid masker to cut down to Oscar's weight class. Now understand, Oscar's just one fighter, but yet we know at least three of his fights were tainted by illegal drug use by his opponents. So let's just focus on the heavyweight title. I'm going to exclude all the other titles. Let's just focus on the glamorous, the most glamorous in my opinion, title in the world of boxing, the heavyweight title. Let's focus on major sanctioning body heavyweight belts, right? I'm going to exclude the minor belts. I'm just going to look at the major belts. Did you know that former IBF heavyweight title holder, right? The reason I say former is he ends up getting stripped of the belt. Franz Botha tested positive for nandrolone. Right, folks? You don't end up with nandrolone in your system by, let's say, putting the wrong sweetener in your coffee. You have to go looking for nandrolone, right? Drug use is so prevalent in boxing that if you follow boxing long enough, you actually start to learn the names of drugs. So understand, Franz Botha, an IBF heavyweight champion, gets stripped of his belt because of use of nandrolone. Not an isolated incident. How can I say that with certainty? Because WBA heavyweight titleist James Toney gets stripped of the WBA heavyweight title because of his use of nandrolone as well as stanozolid. Right? I know I'm butchering names here. We'll give it the best shot we can. But just to understand, nandrolone led to the stripping of an IBF and a WBA heavyweight champion. let me also say, too, let's talk about a couple of Hall of Famers, right? You know, there have been rumors out there, but let's go beyond the rumors. In the case of Vitaly Klitschko, right? You know, Vitaly Klitschko was thrown off the 1996 Ukrainian Olympic team because he tested positive for steroids. So, Vitaly, future boxing Hall of Famer, one of the best heavyweights I've ever seen, right? I personally feel that Vitaly Klitschko is the best Klitschko in the ring, right? Vitaly Klitschko wrote a book where he admitted that he took steroids before getting thrown off the 1996 Olympic team. Now, let me just say this. Don't fall in love with the story of a guy who's failed a steroids test, right? All of these guys who failed steroid tests have provocative stories where they took the steroids because they were rehabbing a leg injury. That's the Vitaly Klitschko story, right? All of these guys have stories where they try to convince you that the steroids accidentally ended up in their coffee, or they use the steroids for, you know, some charitable purpose or something like that, right? But just know, Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer, Vitaly Klitschko, thrown off the Olympic team for steroid use. Did you know that according to some federal documents, someone at Evander Holyfield's address, a person named Evan Fields, who's never been found, might not exist, was receiving shipments of HGH, human growth hormone? Now, of course, Holyfield doesn't know anything about this, right? I mean, hell, a lot of packages show up, right? Why would, you know, maybe this is someone with an axe to grind who says, hey, I want Evander Holyfield to feel bad or to look bad, so I'm going to just, out of my own pocket, buy some HGH, and I'm going to mail it to Holyfield. But just understand, Evander Holyfield's residence received HGH. Right? Now, whether he took it or not gets you into the, you know, level of explanations that we don't want to deal with, right? The, you know, Roger Clemens, Rafael Palmeiro, I was taking vitamin B12 shots type level of, you know, explanations. Just understand, though, that Holyfield has had HGH, well, let's just say HGH is delivered to a place where Holyfield lives. Now, maybe somebody else in the house has a need for HGH. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Let me also say, too, that boxing is so ridiculous. And I mean so ridiculous that let's get back to nandrolone. Did you know that Luis Ortiz failed a test for nandrolone in 2014? Right? That's 3 different boxers failing tests for nandrolone. Ostarine, another exotic drug. You might not have heard of it until you heard that Lucien Boutte failed a test for taking Ostarine. Well, boxing's so ridiculous, you've had some guys failing multiple drug tests. Right? As if the embarrassment of failing one test wasn't enough. Somehow Lucas Brown and Alexander Povetkin, right? By the way, these are heavyweight contenders. Lucas Brown was stripped of a title for a failed drug test. The heavyweight title, right? He's yet another heavyweight champion stripped of a title. He's still unbeaten. Alexander Povetkin used to hold the title. So we're not talking about fringe contenders here. We're talking about guys who have reached great heights in the sport. Both Lucas Brown and Alexander Povetkin have failed multiple drug tests. So just understand that's where we are in boxing. I understand that the promoters and the managers need to try to portray steroid users as outliers, outsiders, the fringe element in the sport. But you and I know that we read about the use of steroids so much in boxing. We hear about multiple champions getting stripped of titles so much in boxing. And we can just go online and look at YouTube videos of fighters who were slender just a few years ago, who now suddenly have no body fat and who have inordinate muscles by even athletic standards. We've seen too much of that to be fooled by the party line that steroid use doesn't exist in boxing. So, if you suspect, looking at a guy, looking at the change in his physique, looking at his age, and looking at the fact that somehow this guy has a better looking body later in life than he did in his prime, if you suspect that his testosterone to epitestosterone ratio is elevated, that this guy might be, we'll call it enhanced. And again, I'm not going to out anyone who hasn't failed a drug test. We're not here to speculate like that, or anyone who hasn't received HGH in the mail addressed to people who don't exist at his residence, right? What I want to do is just to talk to people who handicap these things, right? You have a few dollars in your pocket. You're thinking, hey, I want to bet on a fight, and I suspect, for whatever reason, right, that one of the fighters might be using steroids, might have an artificially enhanced level of testosterone. Then here's what I want you to consider, right? Because we all know the benefits of steroids. More muscles, you're stronger, more explosive, right? You have a level of celebrity because people love muscles. So let's talk about something people don't talk about enough. The problems with steroids for the steroid user. Obviously, if someone's enhanced in the ring, is stronger than they normally are, that's a problem for their opponent. But let's talk about the problem for the steroid users. If you're thinking about betting on the guy, you can take a step back for a moment and say, hey, these steroids, maybe they'll help him, but maybe they'll hurt him. So let's go through some of the issues that I've come across. Now, there's a reason why, in my opinion, while using the cream and the clear, that Shane Mosley needed to use EPO. Right? And that's because, just based on my unscientific watching of boxing over the years, steroid users, to me, have stamina problems. Right? The steroid user really does need to augment his steroid use with something that's going to improve his stamina. Right? Muscles get tired. Your body, which is very complex, is going to self-regulate. And when your muscles get tired, your body's going to tell you to slow down. So, here online, understand the problem with stamina is so widespread in the anabolic community that you can actually go online and go through the chat rooms of steroid sites, and you'll come across statements like this one from a member who calls himself an anabolic member, right, named Stupid Hippo, on forums.steroid.com in a post dated April 2005. In other words, this problem's been a long-term problem, where Stupid Hippo wrote, low-dose test plus DECA made me very energized. Then he goes on to say, higher doses and I feel lethargic. As far as the mechanism behind the tiredness, I think no one has had a good explanation so far. Anyone else have a theory? And so in this chat room on steroids, involving guys who are admitting to using steroids, there's actually a discussion where the guys are saying, hey, here's how I combat the fatigue. Here's how I cycle in a way where I don't just suddenly shut down, bone tired. Guys are talking about things like taking naps and stuff like that. Well, just understand, in the middle of a title fight in boxing, a fighter sadly doesn't have the option of taking a nap. Right? Understand too that boxing involves a lot of things. Right? You walk into an arena, you're walking into the ring, that adrenaline is probably just pulsating. Your heart rate is probably elevated. Boxing's an event-based business. You're in the ring at the event. Whatever you were doing in practice, that's in the past. Now it's going to happen. This is the moment. So I'm guessing many of these guys have that adrenaline going, feel energized early. But if they don't get the early knockout, right? If the steroids start to make them tired, if the other guy is tiring them out, then they're in trouble. So here's another statement that I got from an anabolic chat room, right? Juice kills your cardio for the first couple of weeks. Right? Folks, among juicers, this is common knowledge. So let's say you're thinking about betting on a guy who you feel might be artificially enhanced, might be on the juice. Just understand that even if the guy looks like $1 million, no body fat, has trained religiously, because he's on the juice, and because the body self-regulates, and because there's a lot of other things going on, excitement on fight night and stuff like that, right? That guy, in my opinion, is more likely to have stamina problems than his opponent who is natural, right? Whose body doesn't have to compensate that much, right? The adrenaline wears off, the fight starts, the guy's in the battle. Your opponent's body's dealing with nature. Your body's dealing with some enhancement of nature. In the juicing community, they know juice kills your cardio. Another problem with steroid users, and this might be the biggest problem, quite frankly, is a loss of mental toughness. I know it's not readily apparent, but if you go out there and if you run a 10-second 100 meters and you haven't had steroids, right? You just go out there and run the best race of your life, and you break 10 seconds on the 100 meters. For the rest of your life, you'll know that you could do it. Why? Because you've done it. Right? You've done it, and it's just been you. It hasn't been you and Uncle Steroid. But I'm telling you, with steroid users, it's a little bit different, isn't it? They break the 10-second barrier in 100 meters. And if they're juicing, how do they know that they could do it off the juice? They don't know. Now, if they're a professional athlete, right, and they are in athletic competitions, where to win they need to break the 10-second mark in the 100 meters, right? They're going to feel that they need to take the steroids to be competitive. You understand that? Because without the steroids, they don't know if they are competitive. The guy who has broken 10 seconds without steroids, he already knows he's competitive. He has the confidence that comes from an honest performance. So it's different. You get into the later rounds of a fight, and the guy who's gotten there without steroids, who doesn't have steroids in his system, he's thinking to himself, hey, I've been here before. Right? We've done this before. The steroid user, if he's off steroids that night, is going to feel like he's in uncharted territory. Right? It's like the alcoholic who needs a drink before he gives a speech. Right? The guy who gives speeches without drinking, hey, he knows he can give a speech. The alcoholic who never has needs that fifth, needs that pint. Right? So, to me, steroid users lack confidence. Now, let me add a corollary to this. And it's an important corollary because we see it time and time in sports. There are a subset of steroid users who were stars without steroids. In other words, these are the guys who have broken 100. Right? Broken 10 seconds in the 100. Clean. So then, after a few years, they need a boost because they're getting older. The stamina starts to fade. Right? They need some trick to keep up with the youngsters, the next generation, the new guard. You see it in baseball all the time. Right? These are the guys taking B12 shots. Right? Well, let's just say that subset is different. If you're looking at a guy who you feel might be on steroids, who has already shown themselves to be a superstar off of steroids, then you're in a different world, because that guy is going to have the confidence. He's going to have the confidence that comes from knowing that he's done it clean in the past. Right? These are the guys who are in their 30s, who you suspect have a new habit that involves steroids. Right? My recommendation to you is, if you come across that guy, the superstar who then later in life decides he's going to augment his performance, right? Don't bet against that guy. Right? But what I've found is that most of these steroid users, they come up dirty. One man's opinion. Right? Most of these steroid users are juicing in their early 20s. They've never made it without steroids. Ever. I'm just telling you that those guys privately know that they have a secret. Right? They either convince themselves that everyone's using steroids, right? Or they privately know that the opponent they're about to fight, who is clean, is more talented than them. I'm just telling you that steroids lead to a lack of mental toughness among those who use steroids on the way up. Finally, let me just say this. Steroids also lead to odd injuries that can happen at any time, right? Your muscle mass is uneven. Understand, if you're natural, well, Mother Nature gave you your muscle mass. But if you're using steroids and you're enhanced, some muscles are too big for the tendons and ligaments attached to them. Right? Some muscle mass is too big for the bone that it's hanging off of. I'm a baseball fan. I can tell you that I've seen steroid users with the oddest injuries you could imagine. And they'll pop up at any time. You need to be aware in a physically grueling sport like boxing. You need to be aware of the fact that if you're betting on a steroid user, that guy could rip a bicep, rip a tricep, rip a pec, right? Rip an ab at any moment. There's a heightened injury risk for steroid users due to uneven musculature and unnatural musculature that you don't have when you're betting on a natural fighter, right? So, in fact, let me go one step further. What I say next is going to be controversial. For whatever reason, and I mean for whatever reason, steroid users, to me, have weakened punch resistance. Right? I don't know why that's so. But I can tell you, when I watch fights and I see a guy with no body fat and too many muscles, when that guy gets hit flush on the chin, he doesn't react well. Right? I'm sure it's some part of body chemistry that's far over my head. But I've just found that the guys with chins tend to be guys who are natural. Right? Mother Nature gave them good chins. When you start messing around with body chemistry and stuff like that, your body just can't make the quick adjustments when you get hit flush on the chin. When I see a lot of these muscle-bound guys, I just know that if they're hit the right way, the lights are going to go out. So let's talk fight styles here. I believe the way to beat a guy who has too many muscles, right? Too many muscles, is enhanced, is too muscle bound, is to force him to use those muscles early in the fight. Force him to move and tire himself out. So by the middle of the fight, the muscles just give out, right? That's another trait of steroid users. They'll get tired all at once. In other words, you see them round 5, the guy is 100%. Right? Then you see the guy in round 6, and suddenly the guy is finished. Bone tired. Can hardly keep his hands up. Now that doesn't happen, in my opinion, to natural fighters, right? Drug-free fighters. Their stamina will slowly decline. It's an athletic event, right? By round 6, you're not going to be as alert as you were at the start of the fight. But with steroid users, it's different, right? Their bodies are going 100 miles an hour, then suddenly the engine shuts off. The guy is finished. I've watched fights where guys who I thought might be using steroids end up falling face first on the canvas. They're that tired. It looks uncharacteristic, right? It looks like the guy just fell off a cliff. With a steroid user, you need to expect uneven performance, right? For gamblers who bet based on variance, right? And you should be betting on variance if you're betting on NFL football. Just understand that steroid users have a higher variance. There are going to be some nights where they're just lethargic. So, the kind of fighter who can force a steroid user to use up his muscles, build up that lactic acid, and then have the guy fall off a cliff stamina-wise in the middle of the fight, are the opponents who can engage the steroid user. In other words, you don't want an opponent who's too low volume. You want a guy who's going to use movement, is going to fight enough, is going to have the ability to put pressure on the steroid user, win rounds through movement, right? You want guys who don't stay in the pocket, where the steroid user's power and, muscles, strength, right, are going to dictate the action. Rather, you want an opponent who can stay a little outside the pocket, but who can increase the pressure on the steroid user by winning rounds. So I look for guys who have jabs, who have games where they don't have to operate in the pocket. And guys who will force a steroid user to use his legs. Because you'll be surprised how, in my opinion, the quickest way to tire a guy out in the ring is to force him to walk around the ring following you. Right? Your legs are big muscles, and you want to force the steroid user to move his feet. Right? So that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I understand there are many people out there who feel that using steroids will increase stamina. What I've found is, no, the steroid user has to do something, like use EPO or meldonium. Has to literally take a stamina supplement to supplement the steroid use, right? Because the drugs that raise your testosterone, epitestosterone ratio, right? Those drugs, in my opinion, will deplete your stamina. In other words, juice kills your cardio for at least the first couple of weeks. Right? So, given that reality, I just feel that these steroid users will be bone tired by round 5 or round 6. An opponent who can have them moving and exerting themselves, right? Have them worried about losing the fight on points because the other guy has superior movement and is able to win rounds from distance outside of the pocket using speed and angles. I believe that kind of opponent, if they're patient, right? Don't get caught up in trying to knock out a steroid guy early, right? You want to wait till the guy's a little bit tired. Then you want to pounce in the middle of the fight. What I've found is that many of these steroid guys can't get second wins, right? They just can't. Right? Many of these steroid guys, their body rebels against them. They're dead in the water by round 8. That's when an opponent needs to then step in the pocket. Right? Recognize the ebb and flow. A steroid guy is going to have prodigious power the first 3 rounds. Right? You can't assume that that power is going to last the entire fight. Maybe he looks the same in round 7 and 8. But understand, he lacks the confidence that a natural fighter would have, right? Because he doesn't have knowledge that he can win without steroids, right? And he himself is going to know that his cardio is gone. So no matter how he looks, at that point, I believe an astute opponent will realize that they could stop the movement, step in the pocket, and they'll be facing a diminished opponent. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Let me also invite those of you who are juicers, right? And I've hung around some gyms, right? Those of you who are juicers, if you have an informed opinion on any of this, I hope you share it with us in the comment section of this YouTube video. And for those of you listening to this on Castbox or something without the video, just understand on YouTube I have my username is Dwyer70905. Thanks for stopping by.